Next we come to Section 4. Now we've just gone through the first 3 sections of the Democracy Act. Section 4 deals entirely with the electoral trust. And so first is the definition of the electoral trust, which is self-evident. It has a director, the trustees, and what it's supposed to do in using contemporary technology, which is things that I covered before in the constitutional amendment. The mission is outlined in, that is, to serve the people and to administer the procedures that I've outlined before. The Board of Trustees, and that is, it's to establish the policy for the trust and to perform oversight of these procedures and the implementation of these procedures. The membership, it's the 50 states plus the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the territories of the United States. So essentially, everybody under the American flag is represented on the Board of Trustees. And the term of office, as I stated, is staggered, but it's 4 years per person, and it's term limited. You only serve 1 4-year term. Removal of there's a process for removing members of the Board of Trustees, and it would take a 3/4 votes of the full membership of the Board of Trustees to remove a member of the Board of Trustees for whatever reason. You could conceive of any possible thing. When there's a vacancy, it would be filled by a majority of the Board of Trustees. So it would take 3/4 to remove a member of the Board of Trustees. That's 3/4 of the Board of Trustees, but it would take a simple majority to fill a member of the Board of Trustees. And the meetings would be held annually or at such times as they felt they needed to convene to deal with policy matters. C, the Interim Board. This is a very tricky thing to figure out. And that is, in this legislation, we had to create a board of trustees right from the get-go. And so what we toyed with was appointing NGOs, and that was not very easy to figure out. So what we did is we designed a board made up of all of the highest elected officials in each state and in the District of Columbia and the territories and Puerto Rico, the highest elected official who deals with the election of that particular state. In most cases it's the Lieutenant Governor, in some cases the Secretary of State, and that person is automatically, in this legislation, appointed to the Board of Trustees by law. When this national initiative is enacted into law, that person, whoever that is automatically appointed by law to the Board of Trustees. And so now that person is entitled to vote on the policies of the, but it's an interim board. And so now that board has certain tasks, and they're very specific. The first task is to turn around and set up the procedures along with the director. Now let me go to D, which is the director. The director, along with the electoral trust, the director is the chief executive officer of the electoral trust. Now he is responsible, or she is responsible, for the day-to-day management and operations consistent with the policies of the electoral trust. The director shall conduct the first election, because that's the first thing that happens after this law is passed. The first thing to do is they're going to have an immediate election of the Board of Trustees as soon as possible. So you can begin to see that the director would immediately take the electoral information from Philadelphia 2, which has just conducted a national election. He'll take the rolls from Philadelphia 2, use those rolls because the electoral trust will be immediately registering everybody in the United States as voters for life. So that may take a bit of time. So in the meantime, there'll be an amalgam of that, plus the rolls from Philadelphia 2 that will be turned over to the electoral trust, and the director will be charged with conducting an immediate election of the permanent electoral trust. And so now you've got and that's the reason why we picked the various officials from each state who handle state elections. So who's better qualified to go out and figure out how to register everybody for life and how to conduct this immediate election? We picked the people most qualified, most experienced to do this. Just makes sense. And so that's what we put in place. Now there's an interesting facet to this, and it's based upon my personal experience. In my career, I've been responsible for two major commissions. One is an international commission which involved the Panama Canal, creating a sea level canal. It involved bringing Japan, Panama, and the United States into a commission, and it was designed to bring about a sea level canal. Well, that commission didn't work very well because, for the same reason, that I had a transportation commission that tried to bring about the amalgam of sea, air, and land transportation. And that didn't go very well either, because the people, myself and my staff, we had a vision of what we wanted to do. But once we designed the commission, it was taken over by bureaucrats, it was taken over by people who had no vision. And so all they wanted to do was to be able to have meetings annually and enjoy. So the Panama Canal, they had a meeting in Japan one year, a meeting in Panama, a meeting in Washington, and it went on and on. Nothing ever really advanced. And the same thing with the other commission. They studied it ad nauseum, and then the study went on the shelf, and that was the end of it. Well, I got burnt, and so for good reason, I really wanted to see that when we created this initial commission, and with a director, that this director would be a person who had a sense of the vision of what we wanted to accomplish. So that the director serves for 6 years, term limited, and that the first director is appointed by who? The Board of Directors of Philadelphia 2, the organization that conducts this national election. So here's an organization that is bringing about, in behalf of the American people, this law that empowers the American people to make laws. These are the people that have worked to bring about the vision for the American people. They're the ones that will select whoever this director will be, and he'll be term limited, and he'll be supervised by the elected trust. Thereafter, this trust, the majority of the trust, will then appoint future directors of the electoral trust. But we're guaranteed that somebody that has the vision of empowering the American people will be at least the focal point of this leadership role from the get-go, having been burnt twice in my political career in realizing that once this gets into the hands of bureaucrats who may not have the vision but are more concerned with perpetuating their own power. It's not going to be perfect, but it's the experience that I've had to try and overcome that possible liability or that possible shortcoming. That's the reason why I have this in the law. Then there's a way to remove a director, and that's under the director, and that it would take a 3/4 vote of the full membership of the Board of Trustees to remove the director, or by a simple majority vote of the voters participating in a national recall election. Here again, a group of citizens can put forth a national initiative and can recall the director of the national initiative. That's simple majority vote. The vacancy. If there's a vacancy, it can be filled by a majority vote of the membership, a simple majority vote of the membership of the Board of Trustees. The oath of office, just like you have a oath of office to the Constitution, you would have a similar vote of office to the sovereignty of the American people. The next element, F, is the organization and responsibilities that the electoral trust would have. Obviously, that's self-evident, a boilerplate, and then the adherence under that, the adherence to existing law in the United States, to the voter registration. That means that the electoral trust would develop procedures for Americans to become voters for life, a registration process, because as you know right now, you can move from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction, maybe across the street, and you got to re-register again. These are all machinations of representative government to make it difficult for people to participate in the process of representative government. The whole basis of direct democracy is to make it easy and comfortable to participate in your role as a citizen. That's the underlying basis of direct democracy. Now, under this, you have three: a drafting service, a research service. This again, as citizens, as a senator, I could tell my staff to contact the Congressional Drafting Service, and they would help me draft legislation so it's constitutional. They would have research that they could research questions so we could get proper answers to questions and guidance as to help us figure out what we need to do and what we want to do. And so that should be available to ordinary citizens. And so that's part of the service the Electoral Trust would provide. And then, of course, communications. We need to be able to provide, and this is the point I was raising earlier. When we need to have communications to such a degree that with every single initiative, the individual citizens at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, that for each initiative that a citizen will receive in the mails a pamphlet that will define the text of each initiative, what the proponents say about it, what the opponents say about it, what is the environmental impact of this, what is the impact, the sociological impact, what's the economic impact, what is every facet of any impact of this initiative on your life. This will all be put forth before you in a pamphlet. They'll be able to design a TV program that will describe this and be played in prime time, that will be published in the newspapers of jurisdiction, that will be on radio programs, and this will all be presented to you 15 days before the initiative is put for a vote, but no earlier than 30 days, because anybody in politics knows that people do not focus on initiatives prior to 10 days before it's up for election. So giving you information 6 months before the initiative is a dead letter. You won't focus on it before that. And like in one case in Oregon where they sent out they had 26 initiatives on the ballot, plus all of the candidates running for office. It was a book of over 300 pages. No legislative body would dare insult a legislator by putting that before you and having you vote seriatim on all of this. And yet legislative, representative government does that to citizens all the time. This would not happen under this procedure. We would have a lot more respect for the individual legislator under our form of direct democracy. So this is what Section 4 under F, communications, would respect your right to conveniently have communications. A citizen would have to be hiding under a rock to not know that there's an initiative coming before you for a decision to be made. That doesn't mean you have to vote. You may not care to vote about an initiative, but I'll tell you, if you don't vote, and this initiative affects your life, maybe the next time you'll choose to vote. I've never been carried away with everybody has to vote. No, it's not that you have to vote. It's that when you do vote, are you knowledgeable enough to cast an intelligent vote? If you're just voting a bumper sticker or a slogan, it's not that meaningful that you do vote. Number 5 under the Electoral Trust's responsibilities is, of course, the hearing and the deliberative committee. As I stated earlier when we were talking about what the procedures that would be employed, of course, would be the hearings, and that's conducted by the Electoral Trust appointing a hearing officer, and then, of course, the deliberative committee. These are both activities that every legislative body performs, and that's how we would have the legislature of the people perform its deliberative functions, conducting a hearing and having a deliberative committee do the markup of legislation before it is sent to the relevant legislative body, federal, state, or local, for an advisory vote. After that is done, of course, it's put in a pipeline where the actual election is conducted by the Electoral Trust, and that election can be done, as I pointed out earlier, over a week's time, 24 hours a day. You can do it by calling up on a telephone, giving your PIN number, because you're registered for life now. So you'll have a PIN number, whatever the technology warrants. You can do it on your computer. You can be on vacation anywhere in the world. Call in and vote on. If it's a federal issue, you'd vote on a federal issue. You could vote on the state issue. Whatever the process is, you would be able to vote on it. Now, the other responsibility is, of course, the Electoral Trust would develop budgets for its operations and for all of its activities, and it would present this budget publicly that any citizen would be able to go on. Keep in mind, this will always have total transparency. So you'll go on the site, you'll be able to see what their budget is, what they've spent thus far at this point in time in the course of the year. It'll be a lot different than our present representative government budget, which deals in a great deal of obfuscation. Then the Appropriations Section 5 of the entire legislation is the appropriation process. And this sets it up where the government normally appropriates through the Congress, just like the Congress appropriates the money for itself, for the executive and for the judiciary. It would appropriate the money for the legislature of the people under its present process, and then it would set up process to appropriate the necessary money for the state operations and for the local operations. Then there's a severability clause so that this this is normal boilerplate in legislation. Now we come to the vital part of this whole electoral process, and that is the enactment of the National Initiative for Democracy. This is the enactment of what you're doing with this piece of legislation. The enactment by the people. This is Section 7. Coincidentally, this ties in to Article 7 of our Constitution, which is the enactment section of the Constitution. That's the creation section of the Constitution. And that's where it said that when 9 conventions of 9 states ratify our Constitution, it becomes the law of those 9 states. That's the self-enactment part of the Constitution that created our government. Because prior to that, there was no, because you had the Confederation, and it took, any changes took unanimous approval of those 13 states. And so now this violated, our Constitution violated every one of those 13 state sovereign governments. And so it's a self-enacting. And so this is the same thing. We're using the precedent of Article 7 of the Constitution of the United States. We're using a different procedure because well, not a different procedure. We're using the same procedure. We're using a different technology. The technology we have today is fantastic. We can ask every single American, do you want to be empowered to make laws? We don't have to go to conventions. We don't have to go to the Congress. We can go right around the government and ask the American citizen, who is individually sovereign and as a constituency can act in a majoritarian fashion. So we can ask you, do you want to become a lawmaker? Do you want to be able to vote on all of the issues that affect your lives? Do you want to come into the operations of government as a partner with your elected officials? We don't want to get rid of representative government. We've got a lot of experience. We have a lot of qualified people who hold public office, and they can do a better job if we, the people, will turn around and establish the policies that we want directly. That's what's at hand here. So now how do we do that? It's not rocket science. All we do is we develop a ballot. And that's what we have here in Section 7. Under A, we have a ballot. We've got the voter's name, just like any ballot when you normally go vote. We just copy all the details of a ballot, and you just fill it out, and you vote. And now, since this vote is over a period of time, we fix it so you can change your vote if you want to, and you can change it back. And now, if you die before this vote is complete, we have to be able to take your name out of the final tally. And if you're 15 when you vote and you become of age and you register, then we have to make sure that you're a registered voter. So you begin to see it's a little more complicated, but not that much more complicated to the whole process. So after the ballot is there and included, then we count the votes. We determine, now this is where it gets better than any election conducted by any government in American history or any government in the world. We will turn around, and here too we need to get the resources. We can't do that right now. But as we, now keep in mind the standard. We've got the standard here, and that is we have to have the majority of the number of people who voted in the last presidential election closest to the date that we declare the election completed. Right now, that is in excess of 60 million Americans that have to vote in the affirmative for the national initiative. I say in the affirmative Because you can go to the website right now, nationalinitiative.us, and you can vote against the National Initiative, and some do. We have almost 20% of the people who go to the website who vote against the National Initiative. So we have to have, in the affirmative, more than 50% of the people who voted in the closest presidential election to when we declare the election complete. Now, that is a lot of people. Now, stop and think, when we have to go out and contact all of these people and ask them, did you vote? Not how you voted, but did you vote in this election? And if they say yes, then we ask them for an electronic signature or a snail mail signature so that we have a concrete record that they voted, so that there is no question over the transparency and the legitimacy of this election. Now, because when the rubber hits the road on this election, that is, when we declare that this is the law of the land and ask the Congress to appropriate the money for the Electoral Trust to come into being, and for the Electoral Trust to appropriate the money to begin to register the American constituency for life, that, of course, is when this comes into being. This is the explanation of the National Initiative for Democracy. I hope it's been helpful to you. Thank you.